all these regulations and the directive especially, but the regulations sometimes need also to be implemented. I'm still speaking of the legal framework. I'm now only saying what is officially available to everybody. You know that there is a website where all the legislation regarding the European communities is available, and you can also find what has been officially communicated to the Commission as implementation of directives. So you have a section which is called National Execution Measures, where we can officially show what Member States has communicated to us. So first thing, not necessarily what is a legislation which has already been adopted in the national parliament has already been communicated to the Commission, which means that the list that you can see here is on purpose generic in the sense that it is not specifying what countries has implemented fully the directive and the ones which have only partially implemented, because there is still some regional legislation to be adopted. Neither maybe countries which have already adopted in their parliaments some legislation but which have not yet been communicated. So this is plainly the list that you can find on the public website. My message is not that there are countries which are faster than other ones. I would say that, well, this process is taking some time. Sometimes it's a matter of, due to the necessity of having complementary regional legislation. Sometimes it's a matter of finding enough time and the right placeholders in the parliament to go through a legislation which is basically seen as a technical nature, and which, especially in times where there are other priorities much more compelling, as the economic crisis, maybe adopting a legislation on GI framework is not seen as the priority number one. But what the positive message that I want to provide here is that all member states are acting on this, and even the ones which are not listed here have ongoing initiatives to adopt a formal implementation of this power. Now we move to the non-legal framework. You all know then that all these regulations are accompanied by a certain number of documents and initiatives. There is a certain number of guidance and recommendations around. The Commission is also organizing a certain number of workshops, technical and non-technical. Last week, in conjunction with the Inspire Committee, there was a workshop addressing member state contact points to try to provide some replies on some questions concerning the implementation of this power. Some doubts, questions on how some certain articles should be interpreted. There are also technical workshops, of course. There's an issue which is coming up recently and will be addressed as well by my colleagues later, but I want to mention it here. We are still in a phase where we are developing a lot of initial pieces of regulation and initial bricks of the full Inspire building. We are slowly entering into a phase where we also start, and we have to start to think to maintenance. Can be, in a way, a bit hard to imagine that we are not yet at the end of the first phase, and we have now to think how to maintain and to change things which have just been adopted or even not yet. But of course, the world is moving. The idea of maintenance is that anyway, first of all, we have to think to adopt or to agree on a methodology to maintain what has been already defined so far, because nothing is written in stone. Of course, there is a different pace into the evolution of the regulations compared to the guidelines. It's clear that guidelines have to evolve and be maintained more frequently than regulations. We don't think to change regulations every year, of course, to reassure countries, but still, well, regulations will go into, of course, a less frequent evolution, but still, maybe there will be a cycle which could be, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, maybe 5 years could be the right. Certainly the guidelines need to be updated and kept updated more frequently. So we are now thinking to a certain way of assuring this maintenance with a model which could be based partially on what has been used so far for the definition of the implementing rules, but could also be slightly different to take into account the different context. A couple of guidelines which I want to mention because they are not technical and they are directly coming from the activities of my Directorate General. Guidelines which have been issued concerning the application of the regulation on data sharing, which already contains some, well, they are basically addressing the issue of how the European institutions can get access to data from member states, which is basically concerning the institution, but still they already contain some advice on how to, for example, define models for licenses, a bit of a definition of what is the Inspire use, and also something which is not really contained in the regulation, but could be considered as a complementary agreement in case agreements between the Commission and the institutions and member states would be established. For example, something concerning emergency, which is not itself an obligation of the regulation, could be still be included in agreements. And there is a second document which is certainly more interesting for everybody, which is a good practice document. Even if this is a bit beyond what is the scope of the regulation on data sharing, the Commission and the drafting team, which we have to thank once more for the commitment and the work that has been provided for this, have issued a good practice document which is intended to show good models, good practices in data sharing between administrations. So we are no more speaking of what happens to provide data to the institution. This is really good. This is really data sharing in general. Different models, examples of framework agreements, but as well as licenses, what kind of charging mechanisms are now around and what could be recommended to have an efficient data sharing. All this has been also published, and I think is something which is very important to be read. Now, concerning what is happening, because of course the implementation is a work in progress. Implementation is based on all the documents that I mentioned so far, but is also then is relying on what is concretely being made in member states. Now, there is a study which is called the State of Play, which is going on since some years. It was commissioned for the first time at the beginning of the year 2000, when we were in the process of adopting an Inspire directive, and it was meant to try to understand what was the situation. Now, we have already 2 or 3 editions of these studies, which are publicly available. There is a certain interest in this because you can compare then the evolution. There are tables like this one, which of course is not readable, but there are tables like this which show the evolution in the years on a certain number of indicators of how member states of the European Union plus other countries, the EFTA countries and the accession countries are behaving in terms of development of spatial data infrastructure. There is a new edition in 2010-2011 ongoing. There was yesterday a workshop with, again, with the member states contact point to provide the first results. Now, this is something which is complementing what is the formal obligation to report to the Commission on monitoring and monitoring the implementation of Inspire. There is a regulation, which I mentioned before, which obliges member states once a year to provide to the European Commission a certain number of indicators, which should be used by us to assess how the implementation of a spatial data infrastructure in member states is progressing. These are indicators which are, well, there is a certain number of them, which I mentioned here. I'm happy to say, and not surprised, but positively impressed by the fact that